21st Century Toys, or 21C as insiders called it, was a truly phenomenal scale military toy maker that operated from Southern California in the late 1990s and early 2000s and sold amazing high detail 1/6 and 1/18th and later smaller scale figures and vehicles. Sadly, this company went out of business around 2007. Very little detail is available online about this manufacturer, and I presented what I could find in an earlier video. Amazingly, I was contacted by a gentleman named Carl, whose brother Heath actually worked for the toy company back in its early days. I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Heath, owner of Block 4, that's BLOK 4, a media company that creates and restores amazing set and character creations for Hollywood movies. Heath has a long history of creating artwork for models. Back in 1998, Mike Masita, creative director for 21C, and according to Heath, the whole reason there was an Ultimate Soldier 12-inch scale toy line, invited Heath to come work for 21C as a 1/6 scale model sculptor and painter. According to Heath, many of the creative model and figure builders employed by 21C in the early days were from the Los Angeles Garage Kid community, which were essentially young people with a strong interest in creating amazing scale work. This inflow of intense creativity gave 21C its characteristic high quality, as well as the vast quantity of amazing products that 21C produced. 21C started out with a 1/6 scale line, which included the amazing 1/6 scale Little Bird and an enormous Humvee, Vietnam era and modern 12-inch figures and collectibles. A man named Dave Quanto, a well-known name in these creative circles, was the first mold designer for 21C and initially created the prototypes and master molds that were used to manufacture the Ultimate Soldier line. Eventually, Heath started creating molds, and you can even see his face in the box art for the 1/6 scale British paratrooper and the 101st Pathfinder. As a World War II reenactor, Heath was familiar with many facets of World War II clothing, weapons, and equipment, and used this knowledge to create amazingly accurate figures for 21C. Heath went into detail about how prototypes were created and then sent to the Chinese manufacturers, who went through an iterative process with 21C to ensure that the production version would live up to 21C's high standards for quality. Production was a disciplined, regulated process that included several levels of quality control. Heath did make it very clear that no child labor was ever used in the production of 21C, and the painters for the figures had amazing and professional skills, and they would have 4 or 5 brushes in their hands as they created the models. I was actually surprised to learn that all of these toys were hand painted, and this wasn't done by a machine. Heath did mention that the technology existed even in the early 2000s to make a small 1/48 or 1/72nd scale model vehicle and then increase the size and blow it up to whatever size you wanted to create. Technology has only improved since then, and we can see such amazing things as computer-rendered face sculpts that perfectly match famous actors' appearances. I told Heath that I always wondered why Hasbro didn't put nearly as much effort and quality into the G.I. Joe vehicles as 21C put into its products. He explained that unlike Hasbro, 21C was a boutique company, and that this is a matter of overhead. Hasbro, which had a much higher overhead than 21C, could not afford to pay as much for every unit. Thus, the quality took a hit. I also think that 21C was more of a passion project, and Hasbro is much more of a profit-motivated corporation. Sadly, 21C's business model was less successful than Hasbro's. Heath explained to me that for toy manufacturers, the toy industry toy fairs are one of the primary ways that a toy company gets picked up for a contract with the big stores, which back in 1999 was primarily Toys R Us. One thing that hurt 21C financially was that traditionally Toys R Us would order a certain number of units of toys and then pay half of the total up front. This would give small manufacturers the seed capital needed to start production. In 1999, Toys R Us changed the model and no longer offered the seed capital up front, so manufacturers had to come up with money on their own. Production usually took about a year, and this was quite a struggle for 21C that year. A single vehicle mold can cost $100,000 to create. Heath mentioned that the Humvee mold cost about $60,000, and 21C actually went with a company that created injection molded lawn chairs to create this product. Another challenge that hit 21C and other toy manufacturers was that Walmart created a new standard whereby any product that did not sell would need to be bought back by the manufacturer. After this period, 21C's owner's son, who was a member of the 82nd Airborne Division of the United States Army, began working for the company and created a lot of 82nd Airborne Division figures and vehicles. 21st Century started creating the vast 1/18 scale toy line that collectible hunters throughout the country search for now, and some smaller scale lines were created as well. Eventually, Tim Gore, a movie monster lover, joined 21C and started taking things in a new direction. The Heroes and Villains line was created, featuring 1/6 scale first responders. Heath and Mike Masita, the creative force behind the 21C at the time, left 21C at this time in 1999 with no ill will or bad blood. Heath joined Tom Gilliland at Sideshow Toys, continuing to create amazing scale figures. Heath gave me some insight into what he thought may have caused 21C's collapse several years later. Since Toys R Us and Walmart, the major toy retailers at the time, were changing the business model, toy companies were getting squeezed financially. On top of this, popularity for the larger toy items may have been declining as a generational shift, and frequently people would simply have nowhere to store all of the large scale models that 21C created. I know I have that problem as well. Walmart forced its suppliers to cut prices. I once had the box for the 1/18 Cobra helicopter, and it has the price on the box, $37.84. This item is now worth about $400. With BBI and Elite Force now only creating low-cost, low-quality items, and 21st Century gone, the age of high-quality, mass-produced 1/18 scale items may be behind us, save for a few companies like Joy Toy and Marauders. It sometimes makes me long for the days of old, and I guess there's always eBay to go to. A big shout out to Carl and Heath. It's wonderful to meet you, and thank you so much for the conversations.